The corporate story of the day is certainly General Electric. In a 175-page report posted online, forensic accountant Harry Markopolos and his fraud team allege that GE is committing $38 billion in accounting fraud. Harry joins us now to discuss. Harry, thanks so much for coming by to talk about your work. I just want to start with why today, right? Why is August 2019 the day that this all came together for you? We were talking earlier about, the stock price has shown considerable stress. And so where does this report come and why are we sitting here today talking about it?
It took 7.5 months for my research team to compile this report. And simply, we were done with it. We completed it.
So in thinking about the genesis of that report, I mean, you mentioned in the report that, you remember in the 90s talking about Jack Welch's, so-called wizardry with the earnings per share number. So 7.5 months on this report, but just over the last couple of years, is this a story that you had been looking at, thinking about, hearing from people on?
I had done another case last year related to a Ponzi scheme. It led me to another insurance company that was cooking its books on long-term care. And that's how we discovered GE. So we pulled their statutory filings with the state regulators, and we saw that they were not telling the truth about their insurance losses. That's why we went public.
Harry, you would note that, yes, GE is cooking its books, and they are illiquid right now. How do you arrive to those conclusions?
We did the current ratio. They don't provide a current ratio in their annual report. Who does that? Who misses that? They also don't provide a working capital schedule. Let me tell you, everybody else provides one. We had to compile those basic accounting 101 schedules, and we saw that GE has $60 billion in current liabilities and only $40 billion in current assets. Their current ratio is 0.67. They don't seem very solvent to us. Their working capital deficit looks to be minus $20.3 billion. Sure, they're going to sell biopharma. Yes, they're going to sell Baker Hughes GE for $11 or $12 billion, but a lot of that money has to go to working capital.
So what you're saying is don't believe the income statement, don't believe the cash flow statement.
Correct.
There's already been a lot of scrutiny of this company, obviously, over the past several years. We've seen the stock really collapse over the past 5 years, decade, really. Why do you think other people haven't found this stuff? I mean, there's already been a lot of negative disclosures about the company.
I think many analysts cover, at least in Wall Street, they cover a dozen or 2 dozen companies. They don't have the time to devote 7.5 months with a team on one name. We did put the investment in. And also the Wall Street analysts are trained with MBAs, maybe chartered financial analysts, but they're not certified fraud examiners. They're not trained in forensic accounting. My guys are.
How did you do this, by the way? It's been disclosed that you're working with a hedge fund on this. Did they fund your efforts? Were they self-funded? What was your sort of financial interest in all of this?
We self-funded. There's 3 ways that my team gets paid. Number 1, through the SEC whistleblower program, they pay 10 to 30%. The Department of Justice pays up to 15% to 1.6
They pay after, though, right? So
after.
You have to make that initial investment.
We made the initial investment, 7.5 months of our own time and money. No one paid us to do this report.
I want to break it down so that all of us can understand in simple terms the magnitude of what you've uncovered, and assuming that it is accurate and headed where you say it's headed. Just from the insurance side of this, those long-term care policies, they face a $29 billion liability, and the allegation is they booked the premiums all as well without disclosing to people who were investing those liabilities going forward. And it'll take $29 billion, $18 billion has to go on the books today just to set that portion of the business right.
It's $18.5 billion cash immediately to the Kansas Insurance Department. That's how far they're behind. A $10.5 billion gap charge, non-cash, by the first quarter of 2021 as accounting rules change.
And if they don't do this, what happens to people who need those funds? But then there's the greater liabilities that you get into here. Not only their debt that has to be repaid for all of this, but there's the pensioners. There's $27 billion in unfunded pension liability. So if this company goes belly up, my basic question to you is, do we face a contagion if the U.S. government doesn't somehow step in? The PBGC doesn't have perhaps the kind of money to cover just the pension portion of this.
GE shares are in the GE pension fund. That's going to be a problem. As far as the $27.2 billion in pension liabilities, it looks like they're 80 to 90% funded, depending on if you look at the gap funding ratio or if you look at the ERISA funded ratio. So 80 to 90 cents on a dollar look like they can be paid.
Okay. Harry, what do you say to GE CEO Larry Culp? He came out essentially with a statement this afternoon calling you and your team market manipulators, but he has also come out in the past week and bought a nice slug of stock.
I would say that rule number 1 of investing is never buy into an accounting fraud.
So you're saying the CEO of GE has bought into an accounting fraud?
Yes.
So do you think he is hiding something, or is he covering up a bigger problem inside of GE?
Their financial statements are almost unreadable.
So he can't read the financial statements?
I doubt it.
You said earlier.
I don't think anybody can.
You said earlier, and you were asked a direct question, should Immelt be held accountable? Should Welch be held accountable? Should they be charged criminally?
Statute of limitations is 6 years.
So they can't be. Well, Immelt could, but Welch is free and clear.
Well past.
Do you think they ordered it? Do you have anything that shows you, because you've turned over documents, is there anything that shows that the upper C-suite knew exactly what it was doing?
I had no inside information as to GE. I'm not dealing with any of their employees. I use publicly available records. So I can't speak to what happened within GE.
And the company has said, one of its criticisms that I came out with today, it said, we don't know this guy. He never approached us directly. He never asked us to comment on any of his findings. Why didn't you?
Who wants to talk to the fraudsters to engage in a cover-up? And why let them know where our investigation has led? There are things I've held back just for law enforcement because I don't want to tip our hand.
So you're saying there are things that you know or you believe you know that are not in today's report?
There are several things that are just law enforcement only.
When you say law enforcement only, help us understand what that could be. Do you have a smoking gun?
I think I have a few smoking guns, yes.
You mentioned in the report that you didn't catch everything. What do you mean by that?
Accounting fraud is a mosaic. We're not on the inside. Only GE's accountants know where the skeletons are buried. We dug up several, 38 billion worth. There's probably a lot more.
Now, I do want to, we've talked about the statement from Larry Culp. We do have the full statement here I want to show just to our viewers where he mentions that market manipulation. Says GE will always take any allegation of financial misconduct seriously, but this is market manipulation. Talking, Harry, about your report, pure and simple. Mr. Markopolos' report contains false statements of fact, and these claims could have been corrected if he had checked them with GE before publishing the report. So, Harry, and then it continues. Fact that he wrote a paper but never talked to the company goes to show that he's not interested in accurate financial analysis, but solely in generating downward volatility in the stock so that he and his undisclosed hedge fund partner can personally profit. Certainly you knew the company was going to respond to your report. Has their response within the last 4, 5, 6 hours been what you expected? I mean, what were you kind of thinking here, knowing you did not want to speak with the company before publishing, and then knowing they would have sort of this strategy today?
We used their own financial statements that they published to compile our report. We used regulatory filings with the state regulators and the different insurance commissions. Everything is publicly available. It's their words. I give you the page numbers. We use their words against them.
So essentially, is the CEO, Larry Culp, the CFO, is on her way out? Are they just covering something up here?
I believe so. Why is the CFO suddenly leaving?
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen? We have people 75 years and older, and you talk about, I think it's 86, 87% of the people who bought these policies, these long-term care policies, are now going to be needing this money. What happens to them because the money's not there?
If 14% of the people filed policy claims have filed already, and 86% of the people have not, then a $15 billion reserve hit in January 2018 is nowhere near enough.
And now each state regulates these insurance policies, so that can be kind of confusing, but you explained it really well. You compared them to, I think it was Unum. Mm-hmm. So for every dollar that GE received in premium, what do they now face going forward to pay? And then explain to me what Unum in the same kind of metric has so that we can see this visibly.
Last year, 2018, the loss ratios for GE's ERAC unit were 527%. For their UFLIC, Union Fidelity subsidiary that has old reinsurance, it was 280%. To put that in perspective, Unum, 91% loss ratio. For Unum, for every dollar in premiums they took in, they paid out 91 cents in claims to policyholders, so they made a profit. For Prudential, they took in $1 of premiums, they paid out 80 cents. For General Electric, they took in $1 of premiums, they paid out $5.27 in ERAC and $2.80 in UFLIC. That's a big problem for them. They can't sustain it because the losses are growing exponentially.
Now, when you talk about the estimates linked to these long-term care policies, there are just estimates at this point. As you say, you've compared it to other comparable policies at other companies, but it's not a sure. In other words, it's not a certainty that there will be these losses, correct?
People age, people unfortunately have Alzheimer's, medical cost inflation keeps growing, people are living longer. All the assumptions that these policies were based on turned out to be wrong. They were counting on an 8% lapse rate. Last year the lapse rate was 0.5%, 0.5%, half a percent. And so these people are persistent in keeping these policies and paying the premiums. GE is only taking in $1,133 in premiums each year per policy. And if you look at Prudential, they're taking in about $2,800. Those are huge shortfalls for GE. They're basically taking in 41.6% of the premium dollars that Prudential is, and they're on the hook for 2.9 times more in lifetime benefits.
The regulators that you've turned these documents over to, have they given you any indication as to their timeline, what they're doing, and how long ago did you give this information to them?
I'm not at liberty to discuss what we said to law enforcement and when we said it. You can rest assured that we did turn this case over to law enforcement. We are good citizens. We're there to protect the public and certainly the pension holders and the long-term care policyholders.
Did you turn it over today, or was it within the last month, 2 months? You've been doing this for 7 months.
It's been recently.
Okay.
You mentioned in the report that GE is headed toward a potential bankruptcy. What's the timeline on that, and what would that look like?
I'm just looking at what happened to Enron and WorldCom. Once allegations of accounting fraud surfaced, the companies were filing bankruptcy within about 4 months. So we'll see what happens here.
And then I want to ask about the Boston side of this. I think there was an interview you gave earlier today talking about, you're from Boston, GE's moved their headquarters up there. I mean, was it as simple as they were in the neighborhood and then you said, oh, I remember hearing about them? Like the kind of the ties between their moving into your neighborhood and you saying, oh, here they are.
In the 90s, people were talking in Boston, the analyst community. These are the Chartered Financial Analyst Society of Boston, where I was past chairman. People would talk at the luncheons about GE was cooking their books. They were meeting or beating earnings every quarter under Jack Welch. That's impossible to do because the economy goes up and down, and GE only went up.
Well, and so to the Welch point, when we've talked about, Larry Culp is the current CEO, Jeff Immelt would have been the CEO inside that 6-year window with statute of limitation. John Flannery had a turn there. When you look at that leadership, progression, is there any one of these CEOs that you feel is kind of the heart of where the company has gone today, right? Was someone, the culture that one of those guys put in place, is that what they're dealing with now?
Jeff Immelt made disastrous purchases of Alstom. Horrible. He top-ticked the market there, along with oil and gas with Baker Hughes. Disastrous acquisitions, $22 billion write-down on Alstom all at once in November. They could have taken smaller write-downs earlier. They don't. They wait until the very end, if you notice. Long-term care, they could have taken write-downs in 2012, certainly no later than 2015. They wait till 2018. It's a $15 billion number. There were a lot of smaller write-downs they should have and could have taken. They just refused to do honest bookkeeping.
These kinds of bookkeeping mistakes or fraud, can they take place without the people in the C-suite ordering it or knowing about it? Could someone, maybe the chief financial officer, do this without an Immelt or someone higher knowing they're doing it?
Fraud takes many forms. I wasn't in the C-suite to be able to comment intelligently on that.
Given what you put forth here today, do you believe other people, or is the C-suite, should they be held criminally liable, or is it the accounting department?
If you look at Sarbanes-Oxley, the people that certify the financial statements are the CEO and the CFO. If they knew about the accounting fraud and it was willful, it's 20 years in prison. That's the sentence. If they didn't know, it's 10 years. That's under Sarbanes-Oxley. It's time that people are held accountable.
And presumably there could be civil lawsuits, even if, as we talked about, the statute of limitations has expired for some of the former executives at the company.
Yes, there's always civil remedies.
So you're saying the CEO has signed off on false statements?
I don't see how those statements are accurate given our research. Their accounting is totally non-transparent. They give you revenues and they give you profits with no expenses in between. Who does that? Why hide that? It's so that you can't do comparative statistics and analysis versus other companies in their industries.
I know you don't like the timeline, but I got to imagine from what I'm hearing you say, again, if it's all accurate, GE's not around. It's in Chapter 11, what, in 3 months, 6 months?
I think that's the next chapter in GE's history.
We talked about the hedge fund that you're working with and that they're shorting the shares. Are you personally shorting the shares as well? Or have
No, not at all. I don't have any trading positions. This hedge fund is paying a percentage of
Can you disclose the
trading.
hedge fund?
I cannot. They asked for confidentiality. I did not partner with them. They never helped us with the research. They looked at our product. All they wanted to do was have an advanced look at our research.
But you said you're getting a percentage of the profits
Yes,
they get
ma'am.
from shorting the stock.
And we're also getting paid from the SEC whistleblower program many decades from now.
What's next for you after this?
I have other accounting fraud cases lined up. There's plenty out there. And so I'm just going to go after them one at a time. I have a really good team. I'll probably do one case a year.
Are they on the scale of a company? I mean, GE is a huge company, but are we going to have you back in here for another company?
Yes, I have some that are smaller, maybe only 30, 50 billion in market cap. I have some that are well over 100 billion in market cap.
All right, Harry Markopolos, thank you so much for stopping by.